So off camera, I went ahead and trimmed the ears off like we did in the previous video, and then kind of figured out the best bending pattern for these to get them to work here. And I think what I've got here will work. So let's go ahead and attempt to put this together. I've already mounted, of course, the power supply, and I've got the screws out, so I should be able to just set that in place. Get a screw started. And have enough poking through here, which I do, to get a good solder joint. So the 1-inch ones are just long enough for this, which is why I bought the 1-inch ones. I think this will work out well. They are, as you can see, there's, they're insulated with the heat shrink tubing, which helps. I wish I had the correct colors here for the heat shrink tubing. See insulation a little bit. Yeah, I need to trim a little more insulation off of this one. May need to off a couple of these. It's just heat shrink tubing, but we'll see how that fits. So like I said, I would buy white, or maybe even blue brown. Yep, that pokes through just fine. That one could poke through a little bit more, but that's partly because even with the extra screw here, the power supply still isn't fitting flat. There is a hole here, and I'm wondering now if I should put another hole in, so you could put this is just a hole, so you could put a nut and bolt in there to help hold it down flush. I've noticed with these larger frame ones, they never fit, exactly flush, and I don't know why. That's frame ground. I'm just going to use black for it, even though it should be green. There's a no connection there, which is just literally there's no connection out of this particular power supply, but a different power supply could potentially have a 4th voltage out, so this footprint will kind of fit all of the power supplies in this form factor. And you could just copy this one and make a variant of it, and of course label the silkscreen to whatever that voltage is, so it's there in case it needs to be used, not because it has to be used. So I'm just going to leave it blank. Well, this is turning out pretty much how I envisioned it turning out. Ouch. And a final ground, and this is the one that I think is just a little bit too long down here. You put on the good glasses, and we'll take a little bit more of the heat shrink tubing off of here. There we go, that's better. It's not too bad. Turn the soldering pencil on. I think it looks good enough. The alignment's pretty decent. These last two don't quite poke through as much as I might like them to. I don't know if it's just because they're bent a little bit different. There is, though, sufficient poking through there to get a good solder joint. So let's go ahead and solder these up. I'm happy with that. Solder joints look okay. It's mounted. I mean, I am happy with that as the way we're going to mount this because those are exposed. The tops of these screws are always exposed, and you could potentially stick a finger down in there and take a shock, but it, you know, it kind of is what it is. You know, it's very much the same thing on here with the cable on. These are, of course, isolated. But you know, it is what it is. So I want to look at are these two connectors. So on the original supply, the center pin for this 3-pin connector actually isn't in the wiring harness. So I'm going to remove the pin so that it'll be like, oh, it's rocking on that screw right there. So it'll be like the original with kind of that as a key, and there's also a key on the 3rd pin here. I call it a key. It's just a spot where there's no physical pin on these. So with these two guys in place like this, and if you look at the original power supply, there's no center pin here, and there's what is called a key here. These bottom 2 pins are the +12 for the monitor, and then all the various supply rails for the computer. So we'll go ahead and get those mounted, hopefully. Probably should have mounted these first. I always struggle with this and with getting these square. I don't need to worry about J6 here because I'm using this supply, so there's no reason to even solder pins or anything in there. It's just going to be unused in this configuration. We've got the little fuse holder. Which again, I'll need a piece of tape for. Probably, like I said, should have done these first. But it is what it is. Let me solder up one side. Ouch. Burnt my finger a little bit. That gets the fuse holder on the other side. I can see now I may go ahead and modify the board. Be able to take a longer fuse as well. Mechanically, this fuse is slightly wrong for this. I'm going to see if I can get it in there. This is the fuse that had the wire leads off the ends here. But I'll go ahead and put it in just because we do need a fuse in place there. Is there anything else to do here? Not really. It is 1821. And I'm going to call this one 0001. This is the first one that I feel like is kind of productional quality. So there we go. I guess the next thing is to get this mounted in the computer. So really this just will drop in. Let me pull the top cover of the machine back out here. Actually, there's one more thing I do want to do here now that I'm looking at this. Let me see if I can find it. There it is. This ultimately is just meant to drop in here, the 4 screws, and it's in and done. One of the advantages I think of this on the PCB is it does leave a space here for this grill. There's a bit of an air gap there, so air can continue to flow, where in screwing them in, it actually covered a bunch of these vent holes up. But I think I want to go in and add one of these. This is just a self-adhesive furniture. Ah, come on. Isn't it amazing how things just always have to be difficult? Give me one of these. Ah, come on. Give me one of these. Holy moly. I want to add that little bit of additional spacer under there. You could be off the common, probably will be fine. Just to make things a little more solid. Of course, this assumes I can get the paper backing off. There it is. There it isn't. Sometimes, oh, sometimes things are just difficult to be difficult. I'm going to stick that in line with the common. It just adds a bit more support out there. There's 4 screws here to mount this in. The other thing to mention here, so I don't know how well this will show up. This is just a piece of plastic like you would use if you were binding documents. So it's fairly thin. It's cut to be able to sit in here like so. It's the outline of the supply, though. You know, I'm thinking I should trim this so it doesn't overlap onto the holes. Yeah, I think that is a good idea to trim it. I want to maintain airflow. It looks to me like we could trim it. I'll have to modify the pattern for this. We can trim it to about here. It's just meant to keep this from shorting. It still overlaps some of the holes a bit, but I think it's going to have to. Let's look here. I could take a little bit more off of that. It's just meant to keep the solder joints from shorting against the inner metal here. This entire metal frame that the Model 4P sits inside of is frame ground. It is grounded to the third prong. That looks good. Honestly, I could even go a step further than that and come back in about here. There's really nothing out in space here to shorten. That way, this little solder joint here with the +5 has that little tab to cover it up. So the entire frame is frame ground. It's the third prong, the round prong on a U.S. power supply or a North American power supply. I've also gone ahead and connected frame ground. So the entire back copper port here is frame ground. And so these screws take the metal cases in the power supplies and connect those to frame ground. But I've also gone ahead and put in frame ground leads here. There's a frame ground or the earth symbol on both these supplies. And I've gone ahead and put that link in just to do it. It doesn't necessarily have to be there because of how these get mounted. But I went ahead and did it. That'll go there. I may have to cut another one of these. I cut it a little bit short. This should have been a ½ inch longer or so. But the idea here is to, protect the bottom from shorting. There was one of these originally in the power supply. It was exactly the size of the original power supply. So it didn't give me any coverage out here, which is why I'm making my own. I'll make another of these. That'll be a little bit better than this. Anyhow, I'm going to wrap this one up here, and we'll come back in a future video and hook things up. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.